Well, this can only end well. With the release of the u46 update on PTS a while ago, we've been able to test out and play with the new subclassing system. It's been an interesting past couple of weeks. You either find people who say it's one of the best systems they've ever added, or you'll have people who just never want to see the system have the light of day. For me personally, I don't think the system is necessarily a bad thing, however, I do think it was underdeveloped in the time that they had. I want to start this video off on a positive note and go over the things that I think are cool with the new system. The most obvious thing is, yes, in fact, the classes do actually interact with each other. As we saw from the first 4 weeks with Gravelord Sacrifice and Fate Carver, things kinda get insane when left unchecked. However, they have started to rein in some of these more upper end power situations. It's really cool seeing how different classes mix with each other and how certain buffs affect other classes. The other cool thing about the system is, at the end of the day, there are a lot of possibilities. Some are worse than others, and one is definitely better than everything else. However, it is just a fun thing to do if you just want to mess around with some build crafting. The system kinda just works. Buffs do in fact increase damage of other things, so if it says class ability and you're using, let's say, a DK whip with Solar Barrage, the Solar Barrage will actually increase the DK whip, which is kind of cool. I want to look at this from a support's perspective and more specifically a tank's perspective. Tanks in ESO generally have one skill line that doesn't do anything and one that has a couple of active skills that might be useful and some good passives. If we look at the Arcanist tank, we see that Herald of the Tome really doesn't do much for a tank. It gives a bunch of weapon spell damage, some crit damage, which doesn't help a tank because your crit damage is already so low. None of the active skills in the line are that good either, as most of them either apply damage or don't really do anything that will be useful towards a tank. With subclassing, we can just kind of yeet this line out of existence and then pick something else that more suits what we are doing, aka we can take Stagger on every tank ever made. I'm only really half joking, as Stagger is kind of OP, but if we look at a healer now and we take a Warden, they have Winter's Embrace for Frostcloak. However, there's really no reason for them to have this skill line outside of Frostcloak, so they can dump it, give it to a tank, and a tank can run it and have a really good heal to boot. Along with this, it's not like Winter's Embrace's passives are bad for a tank either, so you just get that as well with it. The last thing I want to go over is something that doesn't have anything to do with 12-man content. I want to look at 4-man a little bit more. My opinion on it is that 4-man has a lot more possibilities and a lot of stuff has opened up as damage went up a lot, and in 4-man specifically there's a lot more buffs going out because you can get rid of some of the worthless lines and give yourself better buffs to give the group. While I haven't looked too hard into how 4-man content is changing, I did do some dungeon testing within the first week, so damage was a little bit higher then. However, during that time we were surprised about what you could get away with now. The other last thing I want to talk about is solo arenas and open world. For me, I don't do them much anymore as I have everything from the solo arenas, and the open world content has never been really something I like doing. However, just being able to run around like an idiot with just the most random things on is going to be more interesting than not, so that's kind of cool. I can't wait for the lead I have to farm from a world boss and a Goliath Nightblade Templar DPS thing shows up and it's just confusing, but you know, hey. Now it's time for what I consider to be the negatives of the system. To start off with, I want to look at it from a DPS perspective. There really isn't a reason in 12-man just not to run Herald of the Tome, Gravelords, and Assassination. Assassination's passives are just, well, kind of insane, and having Relentless Focus and Killer's Blade in that line for some reason is just kind of, yeah, sure. Gravelord used to be insane, however it lost a little bit of power but not much due to week something or other, like week 20 incremental, it's probably like 5 patch, where it changed beams to direct damage. However, still having access to the base increase to dot damage and a 20% critical chance is kind of insane. Taking Gravelords basically turns your spammable into an execute at any time, and with Arcanist Beam being as dumb as it is, giving Fate Carver an execute is a little insane. As for the Arcanist, however, it doesn't really need an explanation of why it's used here. It has access to really good passives, and well, Fate Carver is still giant green beam that does a lot of damage, so yeah, you know, it just does things. The issue with this comes when, if you're trying to push anything, you're kind of pigeonholed into running these 3 things and nothing else, as Fate Carver is still incredibly busted and has insane cleave still, and then just the other 2 have insane passives, so there's really no reason to not run these. I want to add a little interjection here about something I'd like to see happen. They already kind of nerfed Fate Carver in a way that I actually thought was a very good idea. It didn't really affect Arcanist itself too much. It did, however, affect an interaction between Gravelords and Herald of the Tome. What I want to see them do is, can we buff things that suck? Like, some of these skill lines are just horrendous, and there's no real reason to use them in any sort of endgame content, so it'd be nice to see those get a little bit of a buff. My last two issues just come with the territory of subclassing itself. Take Sorks, for example. In most endgame content, they are used for their Atro ultimate. That no longer matters now, as my Necro Decaying spec thing can just go into Daedric summoning without a care in the world and get the ultimate for themselves, leaving no real reason to run a Sork DD. This can be said about a lot of classes now feeling kind of redundant, as a lot of their power has been in unique buffs that are just no longer unique. The last major issue also just kind of comes with the territory of subclassing and being able to kind of build however you want. Support DPS sets have always been something that I really enjoy playing, and that just kind of doesn't exist anymore. You don't need pen past minor and major breach, crit damage is already covered, and you don't really need EC anymore. Personally, I have found ways around this, and they're really stupid and there's no real point, but this is mainly a personal preference thing, as some people may enjoy just being a parser and not have to worry about support sets and whether or not times are up to get the most out of their damage. However, I did like this system. It doesn't help that my personal preference on playing a DPS is I'd rather play MK or Alkosh any day of the week over being a parse, but it was just what I enjoyed, and it kind of doesn't really exist anymore. Overall, as a final thought on subclassing is, I think it's in one of the states of all time. It was released on PTS in a entirely way too overpowered state with how Fate Carver and Gravelord Sacrifice interacted with each other. But since then, they've reined in it some, but it still isn't perfect. Many people do not like the system in the slightest, and I can fully understand that. I personally don't think it's a terrible system, and I do think there's some interesting choices to be made. However, for the most part, I do see where some people are coming from. Hopefully in the coming weeks, or however long it takes ZOS to do anything, we can get more interesting synergies between classes and make some of the underperforming classes do a bit more. For the PvP people, I don't know, it does things. I don't know, maybe it's fun. I don't play PvP, you can let me know. Good luck with it. I don't know, it might be OP, who knows. Everyone's gonna be a Nightblade, I feel like, but I don't know. Oh yeah, one super duper last thing before I go. Why you nerf pillagers? Why you gotta do that? What did it do for you? All it did was hurt DKs. Like, what's up with that?